Welcome to Wisdom for the Wilderness, a weekly podcast by the pastors of Overland Church, where we talk about the Bible, theology, cultural issues, and even answer your questions. And Josh, tell us today, what are we going to be talking about?
We're going to talk about choosing schools for your kids. I mean, it's a big choice every family has to make. You know, there's all kinds of options out there: traditional public school, charter schools, Christian schools, homeschools, everything in between. And this is the time of year that schools are saying, hey, it's time to register. It's time to plan for next year.
Yeah, I just got an email from Pooter School District yesterday about it. So it's the time of year where we have to really think through this. And my goal for the day is really to make you think through it.
Yeah.
And I mean, right off the bat, I want to say there is no one right answer.
Right.
And every family needs to think through this for their family and what works for their family. Yeah, there's probably some best case scenarios, but those best case scenarios might not be an option for your family.
That's true. That's true. And there's no reason for Christian families to be judgmental towards one another based on their choices in this area. And if you go back to our theological triage episode, this is at the bottom tier. Like, how do you educate your children? There's room for Christians to disagree and make different decisions in this area of life, but there's also wisdom and convictions that we need to keep in mind
and weigh in. Now, I know we've done about every bit of it.
Yeah.
All right. We have done public school. We've done Christian school. Right now, I've got one. We've done homeschool for briefly during COVID. We pulled our kids out and finished the year with them. The second year of COVID, we've now have one in a charter school and one back in a public school.
Yeah.
And the question's still up in the air of what we're going to do next year. Like we're working through this right now.
Yeah. And we're the exact same boat. We've through the years, we've had kids in public school. We've had kids in charter school, Christian school. We did a homeschooling for a long time in Malawi. One thing that I have that I pretty much no one listening to this has is we also had kids in a British international school at one point. But
that's right.
That's not a choice here.
That's not a choice. And I've been to that school. I went to pick up Abe with you one time in Malawi, and I would say Abe handled it like a champ. He came out in his uniform, but in that, if I'm not wrong, that was a boarding school for some folks, right?
For some kids, it was, especially the older ones. But just a funny story real quick, Abe was really upset because they would mark him down when he spelled color because he wouldn't put a U in color. And I told him, it's fine. You can lose the points on that. We Americans have it right. They've got it wrong.
So
don't worry about it.
That's right. Don't. We established this in 1776.
Yeah, that's right.
So here's what I would just say though. Like we've done both. I was a student pastor for years, and I had a lot of students come through our student ministry with parents who did it all three ways. Yeah. And I would just say, listen, no one way is right, and no one way is guaranteed a certain outcome.
Right. Yes.
And it's probably going to come across in this podcast like I'm picking on homeschoolers from time to time. I'm really not.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a warning, because in our, as parents, desire to protect and shelter our kids, we think if we can just protect and shelter them, it will be okay.
Right.
And I'll just put this caveat. Some of the best students that came out of our student ministry and are doing incredible things, missionaries, pastors, school teachers, were homeschooled.
Right.
And some of the worst students to come out of our student ministry were homeschooled.
Yeah.
Right. And so it just doesn't guarantee it.
Yeah. Proverbs says, raise up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from him. And hermeneutically, we have to understand that's not a promise. That's not a guarantee. That's a generally true principle. It's a proverb. And so as parents, we have to understand we have a duty to put them on the right path. And in general, that works. But we're always going to have kids that don't follow the path we put them on. And And so, any school choice that you make is not going to guarantee a certain outcome for your kids, but you just have to make it the best of the wisdom that God gives you for that child.
And your situation and your resources.
Yes.
And the situation your family is in.
Yep.
And we've got a lot of college students who listen to this podcast that don't have kids yet. Hopefully they're still listening, haven't tuned out, because you're going to have to make these decisions.
Right.
And often before your kids are in the situation, you determine this is how I'm going to raise my kids. And then you get to those situations and the very things you thought, hey, I'm going to do this, and this is very black and white, all of a sudden become gray.
Right.
And are not easy decisions to make.
And it's also important for college students, if they're dating, to have these conversations with the person they're dating up front. What do you think about raising kids? Where do you want to send them to school? And those things can always change. And I think I probably would have had a different conversation with Stacy when I was 18 or 19 than I would now. But at the same time, being somewhat on the same page is important. So it's important to go ahead and start thinking through those things.
Right. I want to say this again, just kind of on the front end, that the discipleship of your kid probably matters. Not probably, it does. It matters way more than the education they're getting.
Right.
And you have to pour Jesus into them. You have to teach them, you have to teach them the Bible. You have to teach them about Jesus. You have to do what Deuteronomy chapter 6 says.
Right.
And you have to live it out, walk it out, talk it out. When you sit down, when you rise, you want to be teaching them about Christ and teaching them how to walk with the Lord. And it matters more. Now, I would just say, from my years of student ministry, the parents who discipled their kids well and really spent time investing in them, they had the better return on their investment.
Right.
And maybe a trap for those who Christian school or private school is that you think they're getting their discipleship at school.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I mean, maybe taught the Bible, but are they being discipled? Maybe not, so that could be a trap to go into. But no matter how you do it, the discipleship of your kids matters more.
Right. That's exactly right. And there are homeschool families that don't do discipleship of their children well, and those that do. There's public school families that do it really well. So, I mean, it really...
Christian charter.
Yeah. Across the board, we need to focus on that. And also, if you are choosing a type of education that doesn't incorporate Bible knowledge and that kind of thing, obviously you do have more of a heavy task to do that at home.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they're not also getting it at school. But if they're getting it at school, that doesn't negate the fact that you have responsibilities to help them through that at home. Yeah.
Well, Jennifer and I have always had kind of the philosophy of, we're going to consider education by the kid, by the year. So per kid, per year.
Yeah. And just for people who don't know, Jennifer has an education background.
Jennifer was a public high school English teacher for 10 or 11 years. I think I have that right. And she was in very much like a inner city school for a season. And she'd been in rural schools. She's been in very liberal schools. I mean, just kind of all across the board. She's done it. And she was an excellent teacher. Kids loved her. Even this past fall, we showed up at a high school football game, not at the school that she was at, but that she taught at, but in that same county. And some of her former students just ran up and hugged her neck, you know. And so she made an incredible investment. And so I would just note in here, public school teachers listening to this, you may feel like at times I'm going to be coming after you but I'm really not. I
Right.
definitely coming after the school district and coming after the philosophy of education in the U.S.
And most good teachers are frustrated with the system
as well, right?
And so, when we talk about the system, it's not necessarily talking about every single teacher.
we have some phenomenal Christian teachers in our church that I just love and respect, and some of the Christian teachers in our church, man, in talking to them, they really see their job as a mission field.
Right.
They see themselves as walking in on mission every day, and we've got public school teachers that pray with their students and lead out, and we've got charter school teachers and administrative people in our church that see it as a mission field, and so absolutely thankful that you show up on mission when you go to work. But
you were saying you guys have a conviction to personalize education to your kids, and that changes even throughout their life.
That's right.
Yeah.
Per kid per year. And by the way, I also realize it's a privilege that we get to do that.
Yeah.
Because everybody's not going to have that circumstance. Some people are going to just because of their jobs and their circumstance and where they're coming from, the decision is, I might like to do other things, but my kid's going to public school. That's what they have to do. And I really can't weigh other options. Yeah. But we are in a spot, and I think most of our people can be in this spot where we can think we're going to do whatever it takes per kid per year. And so that definitely means our kids aren't always on the same track and haven't always been on the same track.
Yeah.
And at times that's been a really big inconvenience.
Yeah.
It's been a really big inconvenience, but it matters for our kids. And so that's how we want to pray through it. That's how we want to think about it per kid per year, where they line up and we can do the same things with them. Absolutely want to do it.
Yeah.
So then it kind of comes to, how do we weigh out those options and how do we make the decision?
Right. Right.
Well, one, we have to be very in tune to the need of our kid.
Yeah.
What does our kid need?
Yeah. Every kid has different personalities, different strengths, different weaknesses, different temptations. And so, there are kids that can go, for example, into a public school setting and get the pressure of trans ideology shoved down their throat and still stay true to who they are and what they believe. And then there are other kids that you might have that would wilt under that and coalesce to that kind of thing. So you've got to know the capabilities of your own children and what they're able to handle and what situations you can put them in.
Yeah. One of my sons has always had a lot of respect for teachers and listens to teachers and if the teacher tells them something, he's going to believe it, and he thinks he should be able to trust the teacher. And so in elementary school, like, this was known, like, if the teacher says it, it is true.
Yeah.
The other son, the teacher could say, that's a grayish blue, and he'd go, nah, it's red. He could care less what the teacher says.
Yeah.
But
and everybody who knows your sons knows which
one's
is
which, right? But his peer could say, something, and he would go right along with it, would fall in under the peer. He's not going to be influenced by the teacher. He's going to be influenced by the peer.
Right.
The other son, the peer could say something, and no, his moral compass is going, no, I'm not following the crowd. I'm not following you. That's not that's not right. So we have to kind of parent with that in mind. Now, that being said, now that my, the oldest is who he now very much thinks independently of teachers and does a very good job of weighing in on, but we've had to disciple him in that.
Yeah.
We've had to, we've had to walk with him going, is everything that a teacher says true? When it comes to, once you get to like science and evolution, and once you get to gender now and biology, sexual things, and then anything that kind of gets political, you really have to have critical thinkers and at that point. When we start teaching, they've got to start thinking critically. Yeah. So as we're talking about per kid per year, here's the first thing that I would say. The Apostle Paul talks about in Philippians 4 about, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And so obviously this is not the exact context, but I think we can very much apply like we don't have to be anxious about this.
Yeah.
We go to the Lord in prayer, with prayer and supplication. We think sober-mindedly about it. We think wisely about it. We think we look at our kid. We look at the culture, the context, the school. We keep an eye on God's word. We pray about it. And when the Lord gives us a peace about it, we make the decision.
Right.
And then we continue to trust God, but we continue to pay attention to the circumstance.
Yeah.
So as we kind of move farther in and start talking about the real options and the real dangers in each option, let's start with public school.
Yeah.
Public school is in an interesting place right now.
Right.
Numbers are rapidly declining. Parents are making the choice to pull their kids out for other options. Charter schools get a lot of the blame right now, but I think there's just as many pulling them out to homeschool them as charter school them.
Yeah.
I don't have any research for that. It's just pure observation. I think it's like somewhat of a split. They very much the public school system, and also just let me say, like, this isn't true of every public school system. Right. Like if I were in my hometown, in rural Georgia, I probably wouldn't. I'd probably send my kids to public school. There aren't a lot of options, but man, half the teachers go to the same church.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's right.
Like you sit beside the superintendent at church on a Sunday. Yeah. They've not coalesced to the progressive age. But when you're in a liberal city like ours, and our school system has a very progressive agenda. Right. They've embraced DEI. They've embraced just a worldview that very much does not align with the Bible. Right. They've embraced a broken sexual ethic that's going to leave a ton of hurt children in its wake. Yep. And so you've just, if public school is the option for you, and I have a kid in public school.
Right. And I do too.
Right. It has to be, you have to be vigilant.
Yeah. Yeah. And the state of Colorado is in the process as we're speaking. And by the time this comes out, it may be done because we talked about the bills that were in the Senate and
House Bill 1312.
Yeah. And then there's other ones that we talked about in that podcast. I mean, that's essentially establishing trans ideology as the religion of Colorado.
That's right.
And the public school, and maybe like the public libraries are the churches of that religion. The teachers are the priests of that religion. Right. And the courts are preparing to prosecute Christians and Christian parents in particular for heresy to the established religion of Colorado. Right. And so that's just the reality. And we have a lot of Christian teachers that are doing their best, and praise God for them, to be salt and light in a dark place. And they're trying to figure out how to navigate very difficult situations. And we don't want them to leave. We want them to stay. We want them to be what we need them to be. But as parents, we just have to be fully aware of what's going on. And if we choose to send our kids into this, we've got to prepare them.
That's right.
To go into this. You don't just it's not the 50s or even the 80s or 90s anymore. Right. You don't just send your kids unprepared and expect them to be okay. Right. They are being indoctrinated into this heretical religion, trans ideology. Yeah. And you have to teach them to stand against it in the midst of it. And then secondly, kind of as a result of the schools shifting their focus away from education into indoctrination, the result is that education is really not that great anymore.
No, it's not. It's pitiful.
And that's one reason why families, not just conservative families, but families of every stripe, are taking their kids out of public schools because they see their kids are not getting educated there.
That's right.
They're coming out barely able to read, barely able to do math, and then they go to college and they have to have remedial courses even to get up to snuff to do college level work. So,
Right.
it's a choice, and it's a viable one. Is sometimes families, it's the choice they have to make. They don't really have a choice because of their situation. Others of us, we are legitimately making that decision for that kid. This is the best situation for them, but we've got to prepare them to go into that hostile environment.
Right. And a lot of what that looks like is a whole lot of conversation, a whole lot of asking questions, and not settling for, how was your day at school? It was fun.
Right.
And letting it go. My wife does such a good job of cracking, pulling back the layers of the onion
right.
to get to what's really, really going on when asking questions with our kids. My 7th grader, just in his health class, right as we speak, they're doing their sex ed piece of it. And so they sent out the thing saying, hey, we're about to do sex ed and you can look over it. And so I read through it, and you can opt your kid out of doing it total, or you can say, hey, you're going to do these pieces.
Yeah.
And, right off the bat, it's gender and sexual, identity stuff right off the bat. And so the very first thing they're going to go in there and learn, and I went and looked at the notes, is they're going to teach this new science that's not really science at all. It's just this biased place that we are about what gender is. And this is I'm looking at it going, not a chance.
Yeah.
And I've got a kid, and I'm reading through all the things. He'd probably get in trouble for laughing and cutting up or whatever, because he's not going to believe it. But if you had a student who was receptive, in a dangerous place, I really would worry.
And thank God that we're still at the point right now where they're sending that to you and opting out. But these bills are saying the school can take them to change their name, and they never have to let you know as a parent.
Yeah.
And so we're butting up against an even more dangerous time.
So we opted him out. Yeah. And there were only 2 kids, he and one other, that got opted out, that are having to do this, an alternate thing. And I found it really interesting. The other kid, as far as I know, it's not a Christian family, but the mom works at the school. Huh. And I thought, well, that's interesting. A teacher there herself isn't going to let her kid do it. One, I don't think it's even age appropriate. Yeah. Then I don't know if you saw, several weeks ago, the Coloradoan ran an article about some of the literature in the libraries, and I went and looked at it, and man, I wouldn't want my senior in high school reading some of the stuff on elementary school shelves. So you just have to be vigilant. If public school is the thing, and it may be. And, I don't know. I could tell you that there's a possibility both of my kids graduate from public school because I feel as a parent that it's going to do for them the best it can, and I can out disciple their kind of liberal, their progressive ideas. Now, I don't know who said this. I remember Vodi Bakum saying it, but he said, Don't be surprised if you send your kids to Caesar and they come back Romans. Yeah. And I think that would be absolutely true if you take out the discipleship piece of it.
Right.
Yeah. If you don't disciple your kids, but let me tell you something, you can send them to any school. You can. Yes. We live in Rome, and so if you don't teach them that this is not their home and they're living for a different kingdom, then they're going to end up
this may
Romans.
Be skipping ahead, but not every Christian school is truly a Christian school. And that becomes even more so on the college and university level. There's a lot of so-called Christian colleges that your kids are going to go to. They're going to come out just as liberal and doubting the Bible, even more so sometimes than going to state college.
Yeah. Which let's take that apart, because I think it's a good time to jump from public school to Christian school. Then let's go to charter. Then let's go home.
Okay.
So Christian school wise, I mean, there's a level of protection and morality that could happen, that will happen here locally where, okay, this is a good environment. I've often found that the education isn't as good. I mean, you can have teachers that aren't certified teaching at the Christian schools.
Yeah. And that depends wildly on the school and the philosophy of education that the school has. If it's a classical model Christian school, the education is going to be much more strenuous than kind of the probably when we were in high school. I don't know about your community. My community had a Christian school. I went to public school. At our community's Christian school, it was basically public school with a Bible class. It was basically all the same, except maybe they changed the science textbooks and then they added a Bible class. And really, in those instances, the education was worse than what we had at our public school. But you see classical Christian schools today where they're reading things that we didn't read until great books in college.
Yeah.
So, but
some of that depends. Yeah, it definitely
depends on the school. And also you have a lot of Christian schools that become repositories for kids that have gotten kicked out of every other educational option.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to think about.
Here you also have to deal with, and I know in our context, I know the two primary schools fairly well. Mm-hmm. You're going to have your kids are going to be going to school with pretty wealthy kids at one school.
Yeah.
And at the other school, it's, pretty just like politically conservative. Like that's why they have them there, even possibly more than this is Christian. This isn't liberal,
right?
Politically. So that's a piece of it. But when you move to your kid going to college, then you, because I would say our Christian schools here teach the Bible. They believe the gospel. Mm-hmm. It's not just about morals and good principles. There's some really good Jesus loving people there.
Yeah.
When you go to college, though, just because it has Christian in the name, doesn't mean that it's Christian.
Yeah.
And there really are very few true Christian schools left in the U.S. at the college level that have any size to them.
Yeah.
That have any size to them. So of the big ones, you've got Liberty in Lynchburg, Virginia. That's still very much a Christian school. Right. You've got Grand Canyon is still solid.
Yes. And I'd say in our backyard, Colorado Christian University is still very Christian. Convictional. They're standing on the Word of God in every area of their education.
You've got some in California.
You have some very traditional evangelical names that I would not send my kids to if you paid me.
Right.
Wheaton College.
Right.
We think of Wheaton back in the days of Jim Elliott, Billy Graham, and the classic Wheaton. It is barely Christian today.
Right.
It has gone so far left. I wouldn't send my kids there. I wouldn't send my kids to a lot of the formerly Baptist schools across the country. In Kentucky, we had Campbellsville University. We had Georgetown College. Were formerly Baptist schools, and they have gone left.
Totally progressive. And so that would be true in most of those states that had them.
Yeah,
we don't have one here in Colorado, but most of those states that have like a smaller Christian school. So there aren't if you even think, obviously everybody knows like a Baylor isn't at this point that used to be Baptist, but you just need to pay attention. And man, Josh and I are both alumni of a college called Boys College in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's an incredible school still. They've made tons of progress since we went, but man, if your child is interested in training in ministry or business as missions or something like that, man, that would be
education. Our education program too.
would be really good to look at.
And if I could just give a short list really quick, and maybe we have a podcast about college choice one day. In our region of the country, Oklahoma Baptist University, California Baptist University, Arizona Christian, Grand Canyon, Colorado Christian. Those would be
those are great schools.
Top choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Those are good schools.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have Christian school, and it may be a good option,
Yeah.
for your family. Small class size, going to be a tight knit community.
Right.
They are going to teach your kids the Bible, but then you go to charter schools,
Right.
and I think for a lot of people, they see charter schools as not a good thing. We both have children in charter schools, but two different charter schools.
Yeah.
And I would just tell you, my kid is getting an incredible education.
Yeah.
At his charter school.
Yeah, I've been very impressed with my kids' charter school. If you think it's a Christian school without the Christian name, like this is going to attract totally Christians, that's not true.
That's not true.
That is not true at all. You're going to get kids from all different kinds of families and different viewpoints, but it does tend to be the types of classical charter schools our kids go to. It does tend to be more conservative,
and we should say where our kids go.
Yeah.
So my son John Owen has been at Liberty Common since middle school at 7th grade. That's when we were able to get in. And your kids
they're at Ridgeview Classical Schools, and I have one in the lower school and 3 in the upper school.
Right.
Which is 7th and up.
Right.
Yeah.
So, at John Owen he has more Muslim peers than he would if he were in public, because a lot of the Muslim families that are here, whether their parents are doctors or whatever they're doing here, that they want a conservative education, a classical education,
and they want a good education.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a value, and so there's quite a bit of Asian students, with some sort of Asian background, quite a bit of Mormon students at his school, a lot of Catholic students at his school, and then there's atheists, and there's everything.
Right.
And it's not a Christian education by any stretch of the imagination. It's classical education.
Yeah.
And they learn Latin, and then they're going to learn a ton about the ancient world and Rome. And I have to have conversations all the time with that child, helping him process what he's learned and weighing it against God's word.
Right. Right.
And, right now he's taking economics, and in his economics class, he's having to take some of the things that the teachers say and build it and weigh it against the ethics of Jesus. And that teacher would not line up with Jesus on a lot of stuff when it comes to money.
Yeah.
And so that's just part of the discipleship process of your children is weighing in on those things and having those conversations with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do think that in our community, charter school is a better option to weigh through, and it's public education,
right? And
you don't pay to send your kids to a charter school, and it is public education. It's publicly funded, but they don't have to be held. They're not held down to the lower standard.
Yeah, they do have a selectivity of keeping students or kicking students out for behavior that unfortunately the public schools don't have. Just don't have the disciplinary standards or ability to have the disciplinary standards that a charter school has.
Right.
So you send your kids there knowing that the focus is going to be more on the education more than the social things that are going on in the school.
Yeah. I will say, I probably should circle back to the public school and talk about No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't too long ago. We talked about George Bush and what he did with AIDS in Africa.
Yeah.
This is a George Bush thing that hasn't gone so well in America. No Child Left Behind. That's lowered the standard. COVID comes along and lowers the bar even more.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing like students regress because there's pieces of public education right now. The standard is so low for what has to be taught. And on the teacher's end, because there's no discipline and they can't discipline, they send kids to the office and they get a little pat on the hand and right back to the classroom. It's for the public school teacher who's in the school doing their very, very best trying to educate your kids. It's really hard.
Yeah.
The odds are stacked against them. Not to mention now you've got parents that are a wreck.
Yes.
Sending their kids to school that are a wreck.
Right. And, as conservatives and as Christians, we believe that the family is the most fundamental building block of society. And really, there's no way for our public schools to be successful at their task when families are broken in our communities the way they are. The school can never be a substitute for the family. And liberal propaganda thinks it can. That's kind of their whole policy, is that will replace the family with schools, but you can't do that, and we see the results of that.
Yeah.
And so again, as we said in our podcast about the trans bills, like, this is why the gospel and proclaiming the gospel is so fundamentally important in our communities, because only it can transform lives and transform husbands and wives and moms and dads and kids. So
yeah, that's right. Well, let's move on now to homeschool.
Yeah.
And so, man, homeschool is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
And to our homeschool families that do it and do it well, mad props to you.
Right.
Because it is a lot of work. I know probably a lot of the women, a lot of the mothers would consider it a calling, would feel very strongly like, hey, we need to homeschool. Like I have the ability because of our financial situation. Often it has to do with the father's job. Yeah. That we have the privilege to be able to homeschool. Yeah. And so, shout out, to those who do it and do it well. But I think there are some major dangers that come along with homeschool. Yeah. And so what do you see some of those dangers as? Well,
interesting you talk about finances. Is a lot of people think, well, homeschool is going to be cheap. We're doing it at home. It's going to be cheaper than the Christian school or other options. And really, having homeschooled for a long time, it's not cheap. It is quite expensive because you're buying all these books. Maybe you're enrolling them in online classes and co-ops, and the cost adds up. So that's kind of a misconception. I'd say, there is some truth in the classic stereotype of the homeschool unsocialized kid. And I've seen homeschool kids on both extremes. I've seen homeschooled kids that are more socially adept than their public school peers.
Hands down, absolutely.
Absolutely, clear-spoken, respectful, articulate,
bold.
Yeah, but there are certain homeschool kids that really regress from not getting to have that peer social interaction and learning to do that. And that's why a lot of homeschool families, they understand that risk, and that's why they're involved in co-ops and different things that they get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and man, some of those co-ops and things that they do, really neat opportunities. Right. We have a co-op that meets at our church on Mondays. Yeah. We interact with them all the time. They're out in the hallway doing some sort of science project nearly every week. It's like, half the time I want to hey, tell me what you learned today. They're out there, dissecting an owl pellet. And I'm like, I want to do that. So that can be some good opportunities, but it takes work. I do know that in Colorado, there is some financial, like if you turn in certain costs, you can get so much per kid to help you out with it. Yeah. But there are obviously some advantages, and there's advantages with flexibility. Right. We have some families in our church that basically do school all year long. They don't take off, but when they need to take off, they take off.
Yeah, I miss that about homeschooling. I miss we could go to a national park when all the other kids are in school, and it's free, there's no lines or anything like that. And now I have to wait till spring break while everybody else in Colorado is off on spring break.
Right. And so there's some once your kids are teenagers, there's some work advantages to homeschool and that kind of thing. But the socialization piece, I mean, you obviously have to work it, but I think you also have to work at making sure that they are held to a high enough standard.
That's true.
I have had homeschool students come through that in the 9th grade could not read. Yeah. And because their family took more of an unschooling approach, which is a thing. Like, we're going to unschool for a season, and they've just lowered lowered the bar.
That's right.
And so
if you're going to do homeschooling right, it's going to be a lot of work for the parents.
Right.
It's going to be a job for the parents.
And especially if the parent themselves didn't have a great education.
Yeah.
Which was probably a public school, not great education.
Yeah.
Right. So if they didn't have it. But man, I have known some that just were, brilliant parents that were college educated that raised their kids. I mean, they've read a library full of books. They've maybe they didn't know calculus, and so they sent their kid and got a calculus tutor, and they put in the work.
Yeah.
I think one of the bigger dangers, though, is that you think you're protecting your kid from the world, and at some point they have to go out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is my 7th grader at public school is more adept at handling the things of the world.
Yeah.
And saying no to peer pressure than your kid is. And so, but because they're having to do it. And so no matter how close you guard them, at some point you have to let the birds fly the nest a little bit.
Yeah. And I think you need to look for reasonable opportunities for your kids, especially when they hit middle school and high school, to be around non-Christian kids, whether that's sports or some other extracurricular, or that's getting a job at a place maybe other than Chick-fil-A. Like they need to have that time where they're around non-Christians who are going to be using non-Christian language, talking about things they're doing that are completely non-Christian, and then still be able to come home and process that with their parents.
Yeah.
Rather than, okay, now you graduated, I'm sending you off to the university, and then all of a sudden they're just hit with this tsunami that they have no idea how to handle.
Yeah. And let me tell you that some of the best parents I know, when their son went to a Baptist secular college, like it was liberal but had the name Baptist in it, like he came to me and said, dude, I'm being crushed by the weight of this. Yeah. And he wasn't prepared. And he was walking into, he wasn't walking into a party school, but it was a liberal school. And he was like, my parents, I love my parents, but I think they protected me too much, and I'm dying in the weight of this. And went in depression and anxiety. And
the best homeschool curriculums are ones that are going to, especially in high school, prepare students for the academic side of that too. Yep. So they're not going to just continue to shelter them and not talk about evolution, not talk about talk about all these other things, but they're going to actually say, let's study this firsthand. Let's read Darwin. Let's engage it. Let's read Marx. Let's send you to college knowing more about the philosophies that are being promoted there than the actual professors know about them firsthand, so that you can be prepared to engage and see through them and poke holes in the arguments. Right.
And then you just got to, I think, guard in that homeschool environment. Sometimes in the protection, you can be legalistic about things. Yeah. And that legalism, when your teenager is going to, at some point, rules without relationships equals rebellion. And so they're gonna fill all the rules, and when you start letting them out, there's a decent chance they rebel against it. Yeah. And I had a student in my student ministry who got a job at 16 years old, homeschool, incredibly sheltered. They let her get a job as a receptionist at a counseling office. They thought that was safe. Yeah. The 16-year-old fell in love with the counselor, had an adulterous affair as a 16-year-old. In Kentucky, the age of consent is 16. Yeah. Wrecked multiple families. It church discipline. The whole deal. And it's a 16-year-old homeschooler. Yeah. And being preyed upon. Right. She was preyed. You don't have a grown man that's a counselor. He preyed upon her. Yeah. And, the family thought, well, we thought we were doing the right thing. Yeah. And in fact, no, there's just no guarantee that homeschooling your kid is going to have a certain result.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd just add on homeschooling that every Christian parent, even if you don't choose homeschooling, because we believe in our rights as parents, we need to continue to support the right of other parents to homeschool.
Yep, that's right.
And there's a lot of threats coming through Colorado government and other governments trying to limit the right of parents to homeschool. And we believe fully that it's your job to disciple and educate your children. And if you want to outsource that, then that's fine. That's a great opportunity. We're doing that. But it's also the right of a parent to educate their children at home if that's what they choose.
That's
and
right.
so we should all agree upon that, because we know that God has given us the authority over our children in their lives, and to
That's right.
disciple them and educate them.
And listen to this podcast today, you might somewhat feel like doomsday, like crap. There are no good choices,
Yeah.
and don't feel that way. I would just tell you the opposite side of every negative thing I have said today is also true. That I have seen parents who have public schooled their kids. Matter of fact, there's a family that's so dear to us. They have 3 of the most godly girls that have turned out so well, and they were public educated every step of the way through college. Now, masters, they're at 2 of them are at Southern Seminary taking classes, but I mean, just phenomenal. Public school the entire way.
Yeah.
I know Christian families that Christian school families, Christian school the entire way. Their kids are incredible today.
Yeah.
I know some hybrids in that. We had quite a few that took their kids' Christian school up to high school, thought that kid's prepared to go to high school, sent her to high school. The kids have thrived. And I know homeschool students who've absolutely thrived, some very, very smart kids. I was just talking to a dad whose son is a homeschool son who, because of their homeschool, and college stuff, he's able to get his pilot license at a fairly young age, and is in line to get a job at Delta, and is just killing it. And I'm just so proud of him. Yeah. And so there's great opportunities, and you can trust the Lord.
That's right.
And you can disciple your kids no matter the option you choose.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, any parting words of wisdom today?
Yeah, I'd just say that our kids aren't machines, and so it's not like you can just program them correctly and then they'll run the way you want them to run. They're human. They have their own minds, their own brains, and so the most important thing on top of all of this is that you love Jesus and love your kids.
That's right.
And if you do that, you're going to be a successful parent, no matter what you do in terms of education.
Yeah. Mine would be have fun with your kids outside of education, and take advantage of having fun. Everything you're doing with your kids is an opportunity to teach them something, teach them how to live, what to do, how to love and honor Jesus, and you can do it in a fun way. So have fun with your kids. We just, the past 2 weeks, I've privileged enough to take our kids to a Forrest Frank concert. That was a ton of fun. Two Monday nights ago, I took the boys to the Braves crushed the Rockies. That was a ton of fun. And having fun with your kids outside of school, man, it matters. And it goes by so fast. Parents of little ones, man, just know it's coming. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week for Wisdom for the Wilderness. We hope that you will subscribe to the podcast, share it with others if you found it helpful. And we will see you again here next week. God bless.